to the front of the net. Puck work to the outside to Eklund. Howe back to Eklund again. Kerr sparring with Stevens in front. Eklund creeps behind. Out in front to Kerr. He scores! Tim Kerr and the Flyers are perfect on 5-on-3s. They are 3 for 3. Get their first power play goal of the night and tie the game.
FlyersNittyGritty.com presents the O&B Puckcast, episode 101, as we look at the Flyers' first 4 games. I'm here with my partners, Sheppy.
How you doing?
All right. And, of course, the great Dan Silver.
Just riding on the roller coaster.
Yeah, there's a lot of that right now. I mean, there's wins. They're not playing well. Not have injuries. We haven't heard anything. We won't hear anything until tomorrow. All right, we'll get into all that. We'll go through these first 4 games. We got to talk about how the Flyers act in public when they talk to writers. That'll be interesting. But just get out your expletive deleted, and we'll bleep everything out. But anyway, just a reminder that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast is sponsored by Jim's South Street, 400 South Street. Terrific steaks and hoagies, with or without. You're going to love this cheesesteak. And the great thing is, for 4 decades, Jim's has been providing some of the great Philly cheesesteaks in the grandest tradition of this town. And also, if you live in the area of 400 South Street, but you can't make it over, don't worry. They work with DoorDash, so their delicious food, with or without, will come right to your door. So, again, remember, Jim's South Street, right on 400 South Street. And, gents, let's move along. The Flyers are 3-1. We can talk about process. We can talk about results. And we can talk about injuries. We can talk about a lot of stuff. I'm going to start with you, Dan, your general impressions, concerns, encouraging signs, etc.
What a loaded question. I mean, it's they're 3-1, and it's very hard to be positive for a number of reasons. I mean, I think right off the bat, you can talk about how bad the defense has looked, and then you add to that Phil Myers went out of the game last night, and to me, the way that watching the replay of what happened, it looked like it might be a knee issue and maybe a bad knee issue, and so. They were supposed to tell us today. Now they're saying they're going to tell us tomorrow. My concern is that he blew his knee out, and he's going to need some kind of reconstructive surgery. We don't know, but I think it's not a good sign that we didn't hear anything today. It says to me maybe they got one opinion and now they want to get another opinion. But it's. That's going to be a difficult thing for this team to overcome. They're going to have to figure it out because the defense has already looked pretty bad. Some of the positives are that, Nolan Patrick looks like he's not only a third-line center, but, potentially a first or second-line center in this league, just the way he's been playing so far this year. Brian Elliott was fantastic last night. There's a lot of individual positives that you can look at and say, wow, that was, really good to see. But overall, based on the fact that they were, you could argue, outplayed in all 4 games and sort of probably won by goaltending and a little bit of puck luck. And now with the injuries, it's, we can see already what some of the issues can be in a shortened season. And maybe some of these injuries have to do with not a full training camp.
I can see that. I mean, we've heard NFL players complaining about the increasingly shorter NFL camps, the lack of off-season access to training. And and the non-contact practices, and they'll tell you you have to get hit to prepare for a football season. And Chef, why would hockey be any different? These guys had what, 8 to 10 days to get ready, no exhibition games, a glorified scrimmage. You knew in a scrimmage they're not going to hit each other as teammates like they would against an opposing team. It seems like there's a formula there for a lot of injuries to mount up, and the Flyers' vaunted depth organizationally will be put to the test.
Yeah, of course. And when you think about it, I mean, it like you said, it's shorter. You start sort of build up a tolerance. I do believe even Keith Jones mentioned it during the game that they're not used to hitting yet. And no, and let's face it, like you were talking about football. I doubt any of the guys in football go 32 miles an hour on skates flying down at each other and they crash in. I mean, these look like if this was in the middle of the season, that hit on Couturier, to hit on Myers, if they're better positioning, even to hit on Frost, they might be different ending results. You never know. I mean, it's funny. It's amazing what the human body can get used to, but it needs that time to get used to it. So definitely without a camp, it's really showing. I mean, especially with the practice too. I mean, we're seeing that this team, like Dan said, there are great individual achievements to be excited and look at. Even Morgan Frost a little bit before he got hurt, he was winning faceoffs. He was doing a pretty good job. But as a team, they're not cohesive yet. And the play in a neutral zone is what worries me the most. Other teams are getting into the blue line easy, and they're not making them pay for it. They're getting bullied around, in all honesty.
Yeah, well, Dan should know all about getting bullied, but little joke there. But the thing is, and I said this on Twitter, Dan, the Flyers have left the bubble, but has the bubble and the style of play that they exhibited in the bubble, left the Flyers? And we saw some indications last night that perhaps it's starting to go in that direction. But if you read Charlie O'Connor today, and he talks about their neutral zone analytics and some of the other, numbers and how they stack up, it's not encouraging right now as they take on injuries and lose important players.
Yeah, the game last night was clearly a better physical effort than the first 3 games. I mean, they came out and they threw their body around against Buffalo. The problem is that, they're not really a team that's built to do that. And maybe that also adds to some of the injuries because you've got guys who are getting involved in the physical play that maybe shouldn't be. That was honestly, the style of play is not quite as big a concern for me as the injuries. And I mean, I didn't even mention Couturier just because it feels like that happened a year ago. But, Couturier's out for 2 to 6 weeks, probably. The Flyers said minimum 2 weeks. But, you've got a team that lost their number 1 center and, probably they're the second best defenseman on the team. Second or third best defenseman, and Frost is out now. So it's I mean, your point about the style of play, I mean, that's something that I feel like, you can kind of work on during the season, and not as big of a concern for me, but I won't lie. I mean, watching the way that they played, especially the third game, I mean, you look at that and people were like, oh, it's early in the season. They lost 6-1 to the Sabres. I look back at this, and the Sabres last year, they only beat 2 teams by 5 or more goals. And those teams were the Senators and the Red Wings. So it's like, on the one hand, you can kind of say, oh, you know what? It was just a bad game early on, but you lose by 5 goals to a team like the Sabres, and it still says a lot. So, why is it such a roller coaster with this franchise and being a Flyers fan? Like, what? We can never have a normal team, right? We've got a team that, they'll win 10 straight, then they'll lose 10 straight. One year they lose 10 straight and then they make the playoffs. Another year they win 10 straight and they miss the playoffs. It's like, why can't we just have normal things? And you look at the talent up and down this roster, And, again, you think that they would be really good. And look, they're 3-1. They're on top of the division. But we talked before the season about the defensive question marks, and they reared their ugly head. Gustafson was kind of a disaster in his own zone. Haig, I'm still, not great. Braun and Provorov wasn't working, and now you lose Myers. So that's just the big concern, because it's going to be hard to add someone with the current salary cap constraints. I don't know what they're going to do. You talked about the organizational depth, and I think that's more of like an upfront forward type of thing. I am interested to see what Mark Friedman can bring, because I thought he was decent last year in the limited time that he got, and he can play physical. I mean, he's a guy who will throw his body around, even though he's not that big. So I'm kind of interested to see that. If Frost is out for a period of time, and I saw on the website he might be on the IR, you get a guy like Bonneman up who can play a little bit physically. So they do have some guys that can kind of throw their body around a little more and play physically. But there's still for sure the concerns.
Yeah, and there's just a word about Buffalo. I think you're underrating the new prescription, the contact lenses that Carter Hutton has now. So you got to give him a little credit there. And
there you go.
Yeah. There you go. That accounts for.
To check in with his optometrist before the show started.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we have our crack staff on top of that, and also you got Taylor Hall, and that's. Well, at Game 3, I don't want to just gloss over beating the Penguins twice, as much as I think they're a fading bunch there. That was a classic, what I call an abortion, not meant to offend anybody, but it's a non-effort, and they just were aimless. They looked like they didn't want to be there, and the Sabres just dominated them. So you just try and throw that one in the waste paper basket, but it's really hard to watch a game like that. And by the end, I was just fast forwarding through it. But Chef, let's peek back at the Flyers beating the Penguins in back-to-back games, 6-3 and 5-2. Again, these were games that the Flyers were outplayed territorially. They got excellent goaltending from Carter Hart to kind of bail them out. So the power play was clicking a little bit. And one thing that's stuck out right away, though, was that Farabee and Patrick were really excellent in that game. Gustafson, you saw why Chuck Fletcher liked him, but you also had a peek at why he could be a really high-risk, high-reward player, which really reared its ugly head in that Buffalo loss. So I'll leave you with all that.
Okay, lot to break down. Okay, first 10 minutes of each Pittsburgh game, I thought the Flyers were good. Last 12 minutes of each game, they seemed to be able to shut them down. They still are having a problem putting a full game together. The time in between was brutal, although they got lucky a couple times. And like you said, the power play clicked early on. The lines looked great. They looked like they were gelling, but again, they're not getting enough shots on net. And with that being said, I'll jump right to Gustafson. He got his through. We haven't had anybody in a while that can seemingly get them through on a regular basis. I like that fact. He's also giving up the giveaways, too many unforced giveaways. I think he had 3 last night, so I guess you're taking good with bad here with Gustafson. I mean, you're going to hope that his differential will be he's going to get you more goals than he's going to give up. But I'm hoping. I mean, the best thing I could say about what I've seen so far is they've been all over the place. At times they've looked like a really, really good team, and other times that whole third game with Buffalo. They look like the Detroit Red Wings last year. They couldn't find any kind of groove whatsoever in that game. I guess that's all I can say about it. I don't want to beat a dead horse.
Yeah, let me be unequivocal with what the Flyers needed in the offseason after the retirement of Matt Niskanen. Dan, what the bleep was Chuck Fletcher thinking, bringing in a guy like Gustafson? I mean, it's just... you already had a player, yeah, and maybe to have a deal worked out for Ghost going forward. But look, the guy is so high risk. He's such an anti-AV kind of player. What was he thinking?
I mean, I think we all thought it was strange at the time because he's a similar player to the kind of guy that Shane Gostisbehere is. A little bit different in terms of, Gostisbehere's got the shot and Gustafson's kind of more of a passing puck mover type guy. But the fact that they're both a little bit suspect in their own zone, and then you pair it with the fact that like they moved Sam Morin up to the wing, and their rationale for doing so was that they weren't, they were getting pushed around a little bit in the playoffs. So if they're getting pushed around in the playoffs and they see that as something they have to fix, why are they bringing in a guy like Gustafsson? It really is a little bit strange. I mean, to play devil's advocate, there really wasn't much else out there. I mean, you didn't have the money to bring in a guy like Peter Angelo. There weren't a lot of options out there. And so I think that if there was a good option, that they would have looked at that. I'm sure he looked at trading for a guy like Matt Dumba. But, I think the lack of options is one of the factors. But I do agree that, like, Gustafsson is clearly not the kind of guy that they needed to bring into this team.
No, and Chef, I'm going to go to you in a minute. I mean, I would imagine at the time when Gus was signed, it was very early on, which surprised us. I looked at a player like Vatanen as like a little bit more well-rounded version of what Gus can be, but someone could take harder minutes. Now, he's been hurt a lot, but at least he has the shell of a game that matches what the Flyers needed. So, Chef, what do you got to add here?
I'm just curious. Dan had mentioned, Sam Morin. Does now being Ghost is still in protocol, right? He's not going to be available for at least another 7 days?
Well, it's 2 weeks. It's been since before the season, so it can't be too much longer unless he actually has the illness.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If he has that was then. Let's just say, as we haven't heard anything, so it doesn't look like it. So let's just say Ghost is off the table for now. But does that change? You're talking about being physical. Does that change your perspective on Sam now? Does he slot in as that seventh or eighth defenseman now because you've actually run thin there?
No, because I think it's part of the reason why they changed Sam. Organizational depth was a nice reason to tell everybody. But the fact is, with 2 ACL injuries, his lateral mobility was never really that great. It's even less now. I have strong doubts whether Sam Morin is anything but an AHL level defenseman anyway. And I could be wrong, but I don't think it's going to happen here. I think the Flyers would sooner make a trade, go outside the organization, than play that card. Dan, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they've already been having Morin trying to learn to play forward. I think that part of the concern is defensemen going laterally, like you mentioned. There's more of a chance that he could re-injure, those knees that he's already had operated on a few times. So I think they're just trying to get Morin to playing shape, and hopefully he can make an impact at forward potentially. Despite the fact that Couturier is out. I'm still kind of bullish on the team's depth up front. It is going to be, this is where Chuck Fletcher is going to have to make his money, because if Phil Myers is out long term, which we don't know yet, but if he is out long term, you're going to have to figure something out unless Friedman can come in and really help solidify things. One of the positives is that the style of play that worked well against this team in the playoffs, like the Islanders had and the Canadians. I mean, it's not like, high paid personnel a lot of the times that can kind of help transition that. So maybe there's some guys that Fletcher could bring in that could kind of help there. But it is, yeah, I mean, this is where Chuck Fletcher's going to earn his money. I mean, it's funny, this season is so strange because right before the show started, we saw that the NHL came out and they fined the Capitals $100,000 for breaking COVID protocol. And everyone's like, well, what is this about? And then after that, they announced that the Capitals have got 4 players who have been added to the NHL's COVID protocol list. And they're 4 Russians: Kuznetsov, Orlov, Ovechkin, and Samsonov. And they're really good players. So the Capitals are now going to be missing 4 of their best players, including their starting goaltender, likely for the next 2 weeks. Which obviously is very idiotic, whatever those guys were doing that kind of cost put them on the protocol list. But it's going to be such a strange season. I mean, there's been games that have been postponed already. And so I don't know. It's a weird one.
Yeah, absolutely. I can hear Lavi. What's the problem now? You know.
Yep.
What's the Russian word for jam?
Yeah. Yet.
Yes,
that's the
no.
response. And that's,
Yet.
he probably said, I want you to rip your heart out of your chest. And they said, yet. And they went and partied. You got some vodka. And they were celebrating like they won the cup a couple of years ago. Yeah,
Oh,
really.
man.
So
He's
anyway.
probably losing. You're right. He's probably losing his mind right now.
Yeah, he's not the right coach for this situation, but maybe they'll rally and they'll find out about their organizational depth. All right, so we'll go into a little bit more about a game that we saw just last night, and also, maybe some options for the Flyers outside the organization. But let's talk about, for a little bit of a diversion, after Game 2, Flyers are 2-0, not really playing that great. Still haven't won anything in a long time. And our wonderful king of blocking people on Twitter, Jake Voracek, who happens to be an alternate captain on the road, decides to unload his grudge that goes back apparently to October of 19 on Mike Sealski, who can be irritating and can be tenacious with a really bad idea. But let's panel this one. Chef, I'll go to you. What are your thoughts about what happened after that game when Jake basically cursed out Mike Sealski on the phone, at the podium with the Flyer logo and the NHL in the background?
My first thing was I laughed like everybody else. I thought he was going to be joking, breaking the stones kind of thing. And then he's like, I wasn't even going to really answer that question, but because you're such a weasel. But I was like, I couldn't believe it at first. And then I laughed my ass off. And then I saw TK's reaction sitting next to him. Almost spit his water out. I laughed even harder. And then I thought about it. I'm like, he blocks everybody. And I get it. You're an athlete. But here's the thing: you got to have thicker skin than this. I mean, you've been in this league for almost 10 years now, 10 plus years, whatever. You got to have thicker skin. If you can't take criticism, you're in the wrong business. Especially in such a high. How do we call ourselves in Philadelphia? Opinionated city. So I just thought it was kind of ridiculous. I thought he overreacted, but I also thought it was funny at the same time. I'm not going to lie. I laughed.
Well, it was funny in the moment. I don't think anyone was ready for him to unload like that, Dan.
So half of Flyers fan base is blocked on Twitter by Jake. Are you guys blocked on Twitter by Jake or no?
I am.
You are.
I don't know about my individual account, but the O&B Puckcast is. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I criticized him during a preseason game about during practice about cross ice pass. He was practicing, with your J for the power play right at the blue line, and they were practicing it in pregame. And by the time the game started, I was blocked.
Oh no! Are you serious?
Yeah, it happened
He must have someone going through his account, searching his name, because I was at a preseason game and he had a 2-on-1 and he overpassed it. I thought he should have taken a shot and he passed it. And a very innocuous comment. I said oh man, Jake probably, overpassed that one. And I was blocked after the game. I was blocked, and it's incredible how thin his skin is. That being said, based on what I understand of the situation, and I think that Mike Sealski he's not a beat reporter. He's a guy who writes editorial columns. And just personally, I'm not a huge fan of his writing. Seems like a nice guy. We had him on Getting Bullied at one point, and a nice guy. But I think that he wrote an extremely irresponsible column about Jake back in 2019. This all stems from a column that Mike wrote where he was in the locker room and Vigneault was making a speech about how some of the veterans had to show more leadership. It was like Giroux and Voracek. He mentioned those guys. And at the time, Voracek was talking to someone else, a typical locker room. He was talking to someone and Voracek was laughing as Vigneault said this. And from what I understand, it had absolutely nothing to do with what Vigneault was saying. And Sealski writes a column basically insinuating that Voracek, was laughing at Vigneault saying that he needs to be a better leader. And then I read a response on Twitter from Sealski saying that, well, he had to put the article in. It was Halloween and he had to take his kids trick-or-treating and he kind of rushed to put the story in and then he had to change it a little bit later on. I mean, I got to be honest. I thought it was a pretty irresponsible thing that he wrote. And and a guy like Voracek who has such thin skin, I can understand how that would bother anyone. But for him, I could see him harboring this grudge for a while. So if I was going to assign more blame in the scenario, I would actually probably assign more blame to Sealski because I think you really have a responsibility as a reporter to try and be accurate with what you're saying. But Jake, he's got to handle that situation a little bit better, not call him out like that publicly, maybe just go talk to him in a different place, different time. But in general, I don't really read Sealski because I don't really think he brings much to the table with his analysis. And I thought that what he wrote about Jake was irresponsible. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I had my issues with Mike. I think he's a nice guy. I think he tries real hard. And he hits the mark on occasion, kind of like with the old VCR with the clock. But I think when you look at his columns regarding Sam Bradford, when you look at his insistence that the Flyers needed to wait 6 or 7 years to become a good team before it was go time. I mean, that's basically a load of excrement. We all know that. We see too many teams that put out a letter and say, hey, we're rebuilding, and 3-4 years later, they're off and running. And they're a playoff team and a contender and all that the Flyers were not. So all that said, Jake is 31 now? Dude, if you want to call somebody out, Sam Carchidi was talking about how he had an issue with Pronger. They spent 15 minutes alone and in the privacy, which could have been done on the phone as well. 13 of those minutes were Pronger screaming at Sam. But it was in the private. If you are publicly going to rebuke somebody, at least be responsible with your language. You're representing the league. You're representing the team. And if Mr. Snyder were here today, he would have caught a load of excrement from Mr. Snyder. It's not how you conduct yourself as a leader on this team. And let me say something else to Jakey. Jakey, if you want the criticism to go away, win something. And if your team can't win something, maybe you could be money at money time. Has he done that? Nah, not really. So I'm just saying, I wouldn't be holding grudges and be so thin-skinned and act like a teenager lashing out if you really didn't have, grounds to stand on. Even if you're right, and I agree with Dan that it probably is more Sealski, you're going to hold a grudge that long and then just decide you're going to unload on somebody. If you can't show some class, at least call them like a jerk instead of cursing them out, at the very least. Chef?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I always had, in my kitchen, all those years, had an open door policy. If you wanted to come in, if you thought I treated you bad, all right. And I always told everybody, you can yell, just not in front of everybody. I always pulled people aside. It was very rare that I ever lost my collective in front of everybody. I would pull somebody aside into the walk-in, and I would let them have it away from ears. And I was the boss. And I felt that I got a better reception out of somebody when I did it one-on-one, mano a mano. And I just see that being the situation here. Like you just said, hey, pull them aside. There's like so many different little hallways and little rooms down at that center there. You could have done something a little bit better than that. I understand with COVID, it's an issue now, but like you let it build up for almost a year and a half. It's kind of ridiculous, almost 2 years or whatever. So yes, in a respect that I can understand how he's upset, but literally, like you gotta be a bigger and better man. That's all.
Yeah, try hard. You're going to have a family soon. Try it on for size. So, moving along. Game 4, coming off the horrible non-effort in Game 3, losing to the Sabres 6-1. The Flyers show up a little bit better. Well, you have to give it to Brian Elliott. Faces 40 shots. Again, the Flyers were outplayed for the most part, although we saw signs of life. And we had some line shuffling before Morgan Frost got hurt. He was on a line with JVR and G, and they're pretty good. Pretty good. And statistically, the numbers look like they back that up. And the Patrick line with Lindblom and TK produced a goal, and they also show a lot of promise. So, but in the process, of course, they lose Morgan Frost. I don't know if he has a hand or a wrist injury. And Myers, we're not sure. It could be a back, could be a rib, could be a knee, like Dan, you were saying. But listen, you give credit to Brian Elliott, 3-0. They needed that game, and hopefully they can build upon that to play better hockey.
And Elliott, he gets a rough rap sometimes with Flyers fans, but he's been fantastic for this team the last few years. And they would not have won last night's game if not for him, because he had to make a lot of big saves early in that game to keep that game scoreless. For a while, I thought it was going to be a 0-0 game through regulation. The goalies were just so good. And then finally, TK breaks through with that breakaway goal, and it kind of, eased the team up a little bit, and Elliott kept making huge saves. Like, he saved them last night. Their goaltending has just been so good this season. And again, it was nice to see the effort. But yeah, Elliott, it's incredible. I mean, you look at this team. I mean, right now they're goaltending on the salary cap. You've got Elliott, who's at $1.5 million, and you've got Carter Hart at $730,000. Those two goalies, you're spending $2.3 million on, which is going to change next year because Carter Hart is a free agent this coming off season. And that's one of the things that makes it so hard for Fletcher to go out and try and find a defenseman, because they're going to be in a big money problems this coming off season, having to re-sign Hart. Look, they signed Nolan Patrick to a 1-year deal at the minimum, $870,000. Like, he keeps playing like this, you're going to have to pay him too. So you're going to have to pay Carter Hart, Nolan Patrick. Travis Sanheim's contract is also up. And there's not a whole lot of money coming off the books. You've got Lawton coming off the books at 2.3, and Gustafson's coming off the books, and Raffle, and there's some money coming off from, I think they're still paying Andrew McDonald for another season. But, it's a tough situation because you've got the goalies so cheap right now, and that's going to change.
Yeah, and Edmonton Oilers are paying $6 million for Mike Smith and Koskinen.
That's crazy.
It's utterly ridiculous. Well, I figure Ghost is out of here next year, and I also think Bobby Brink or somebody like that's going to be shipped out with JVR, or maybe even Jake, so he can block people in Seattle, maybe. I don't know. But, yeah, something's going to have to happen, no doubt about that. So the Flyers are 3-1. They head for a 2-game set in Boston on Thursday and Saturday, both at 7 p.m. as things currently stand. And then we see New Jersey twice next week and the Islanders. So see what the Flyers look like starting on January 30th and 31st, and have a back-to-back versus what is shaping up to be their new nemesis, maybe no longer the Penguins. So, gents, why don't we take a look at what the roster moves are going to be, what we think is going to happen, assuming Myers is out, and Couturier is not going to be back right away. Frost is going to be out. I'm thinking it's Bunneman and Friedman. And after that, like Dan was saying, Chef, Chuck Fletcher might have to get creative and do some things, move some money around.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to get interesting, really. Who is that leave on the taxi squad now?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah,
you take a look. The taxi squad.
I got it.
Okay, Lashinsky's not in real game shape because he had the core muscle injury. Andy Andrioff, that'll go over like a lead balloon. And then Carson Twarynski. And, Friedman is actually, right now, he's on the roster, is he not?
Yeah, he's on the roster right now.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Pouliot, did you mention Pouliot?
Yeah, they brought up Pouliot to the.
I'm on Cap Friendly, and it has Bunny already on the roster, and it has Carson Twarynski on the taxi squad, and Andreoff, Nate Prosser, Sam Moran, Alex Lyon, and Derek Pouliot.
Yeah, Pouliot. They just brought him up. So we'll have to see. It's going to be dictated by how they perform, and we're going to find out a lot about them right now. I mean, you got to play Boston back-to-back. They're not quite the same without Chara. And, some questions about their defense, and they also lost Torrey Krug. So that, they took a couple hits, like the Flyers took a hit. So I'm not really sure with their injury situation. I got to get with our buddies over at Black and Gold Podcast. Check those guys out on Apple. Good guys, good podcast, probably the leading independent Bruins podcast. So we'll have to see. And after that, Dan, then you start looking at the trade market. We just had a trade last night. I don't know if there was a pattern going on here, but Greg just got traded to the Avalanche for Ian Cole, because Ian Cole was making $4.5 million. So that's a savings. Who knows what the Avalanche may be planning. And they want to get Bowen Byram in some playing time in Colorado. But that's the kind of player, if the Flyers can move some money around, who could be available, even though I don't think he's anything more than a third pairing guy at this stage of the game. Somebody like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems like it's a little early for them to be able to pull off trades, because the guys you're going to be looking for are going to be probably guys on expiring contracts. Because again, this team's going to be right back in a money crunch next offseason. If you know that you can move a JVR, who, by the way, was one of their better players last night.
Maybe him and Lindblom were like the best forwards last night.
Which Vino mentioned. He does have that big salary, but the bottom line is, and you talked about, Ghost being gone. Again, though, I think they probably tried to move him last offseason, and they're just no takers. There's no teams have that kind of space.
But that's like with 3 years left. With 2 years left, it's a little bit more feasible, I would think.
Yeah, potentially. I guess we'll see. It's going to have to be kind of like, again, Fletcher's going to have to work a miracle here with this team if Myers is out long term.
Yeah, absolutely. But like I just mentioned, they did make a trade, Colorado. Of course, they're in a different cap situation, but trades can be made, and I think the Flyers can get creative if they have to. They didn't come back to just kind of tread water again. And this goes back to the original discussion point of why Gustafsson, why $3 million, even for 1 year. He wasn't the right type of player for what they needed, and now they're taking on some hits and some injuries, and it stands out in bold relief. I'm trying to give the guy a break, but I can tell you this much. If there were fans in the building, this would not have gone well for him. He should be very happy that we do not have a lot of fans, or a few people in there, but if they had a full house there, it would be ugly.
Oh, that 6-1 game, that would have been, whew, that would not have been good.
Yeah, that would have been right up there when they were throwing the bracelets on the ice.
I was at that one. I did not throw my bracelet on the ice.
I'm proud of you.
I did not. Yeah.
Okay, so gents, we talked about the upcoming schedule of these games, and it's time to get into a feature that, Dan, you've had a lot of experience with, the Q&A, and we love interacting with our audience. And we have some Twitter questions that were directed to us, but particularly at you. And maybe we could panel some of these. And why don't we start off with the first one you have on your list?
Okay. Yeah. We get some good questions here from some of the listeners, some of our loyal listeners. The first one was from Brian Murphy at Murph23B, and he asked, are the Flyers too slow as a team? Should there be concern that many prospects are listed as average skaters? Brink, Forrester, Radcliffe, Allison. I mean, my opinion is that is not an issue with this team or with the group of prospects that they have. First of all, I think Brink's skating has improved. I think that, Allison's a decent skater, but I think that skating is not really the issue that this team is kind of dealing with right now. Because teams that aren't great skating teams, like the Blues were a couple of years ago, you can still win the cup. So I would not be concerned with the team speed, because, by the way, they do have a bunch of really good skaters on this team. Up and down the lineup. So that's really not a concern for me. What about you guys?
Well, look, they know what they always say. The puck can move faster than the player. And if you have high IQ players, all the more to that point. So if people are in the right spots and they have the vision to make the quick plays, it's amazing how fast the puck can get up the ice. Yes, I'd love more foot speed on this team, but there are emerging players like you mentioned, Dan, like Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee, that are already skating better than they had in the past. So while some of these guys are slowing down, the younger core look faster. Nolan Patrick looks faster. TK has very good speed, as we saw once again last night. And the Flyers have some really smooth skating, if not dynamic skating, defensemen in Travis Sanheim and Phil Myers. So I don't think there's an overall speed problem here. We'd all love to have a McDavid or a McKinnon that could be a game breaker with their speed alone. But, you also have empty heads like Andreas Athanasiou, who doesn't think the game very well, even though he skates like the wind.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Next question is from Wall Crab, and he asks, can you guys think of any recourse as to what the team or fans can do about the league's apparent bias as far as disciplinary actions, i.e. not suspending McCann for the elbow on Sanheim? I'll be sick if they take any action against Provorov for this Hutton BS. So, first real quick, the Provy thing. I mean, that was insane. Provorov got knocked into the goalie by the Sabres defenseman. And, he could do nothing about that. And the Sabres coach came out after the game and was complaining that Provorov should be suspended or whatever. Obviously, that was ridiculous. The McCann elbow on Sanheim, while I agree that I think it would have been fine if there was a suspension there, I want to see how the league's going to handle suspensions in a shortened season, because we've got a 56-game season. And so I think that they're going to maybe be a little more reticent to hand out suspensions, I would say. So I think that McCann could have gotten a suspension there, but I'm not ready to kind of say that was a bias against the Flyers at this point. What did you guys think about that hit?
Yeah, Chef?
Well, I was thinking, first of all, they have to be a lot more consistent on how they're dishing out their suspensions. I don't care one way or the other. If they're going to say that this is bang, this is the example, this is what we're talking about. I agree with Dan. It could have gone either way. I think he went out of his way to hit Sanheim in the head a little bit, and I can totally see that. Am I happy he got a fine? Yes. I think we're going to see that this season, though. Like Dan said, I think you're going to just see heavier fines than as opposed to like actually taking people out of the game, because I think we got to take into account this too. This is going to be this is an old school schedule. And there's going to be you're playing, the team 2 days, 2 times within 3 days, right? There's going to be nastiness. So there's like what they got 5 more back-to-backs on the schedule. I think they had 6 altogether. So they got 5 more back-to-backs. Tempers are going to flare, and I think the league knows that. And I think, like Dan's point, they're going to be a little more hesitant to suspend people. But as you can see with the Capitals, and you can see with 2 hits, Knacks hit, they had no problem taking money away from you because they want to fill up the NHL coffers. But with the cap struggles, but they have no problem dishing out the fines. But I think they're going to be a lot less hesitant to suspend people.
You're a lot more hesitant, you mean?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with your overall point. I think the situation with Nick and that hit was they already had, a double minor assessed to him. So I think that might have played a factor. So it's a supplemental discipline. But yeah, in terms of the thought that the Flyers are singled out by the league, that goes back to the Bully days. And the Flyers have been a team that through Ed Snyder is known for whining about the kind of treatment they get. But if you go from town to town, you hear a lot of the same things. I think the Flyers are not perceived the same way as they have been in the past, and probably haven't since, I don't know, since the early 2000s. So I don't think the Flyers are singled out one way or another by the league. I think they take things on a case-by-case basis. I will say 20, 30 years ago, I think it was a thing because the Flyers had that reputation and for toughness, and even into the Lindros era and beyond, a little bit beyond, where I think there might have been something to that back then, but not now. I don't see that.
You know what, though, not to go off on a little tangent, but when I've been watching some of those old Broad Street Bullies games, back then, stuff like that elbow to Sanheim, that stuff sometimes wouldn't even get called a penalty. Like, I think that there's also kind of a lot more sensitivity now to high hits and whatnot. Is that, Isaiah, is that, you think that's accurate? I mean, I watch these old games and I'm surprised at some of the stuff that doesn't even get called a penalty, much less looked at for a suspension.
Well, there needs to be some perspective. Number one, the guys were not quite as big, not quite as fast. The pads weren't rock hard like they are now. They're like almost like football pads. So it's a little bit different. And I think that while the human body can adapt, as these players got bigger, faster, and the velocity was greater, and the pads were harder and tougher and more protective, it all kind of came together as a reason why the concussions became more frequent. In addition to the fact that guys used to skate away from concussions. But again, it had a lot to do with the impact being less relative to the era that they played in.
Okay, that makes sense. Next question, I think this is probably a quick answer, is at Iowa Philly Flyer asks, any chance Niskanen comes back? So, I mean, there's really 2 answers to this, and both are pretty quick. The first one is I have no idea if Niskanen's coming back. And really, we don't have any way of knowing if he's coming back. I think that the assumption is he's not coming back, especially since he one of the reasons he retired was because he didn't want to deal with COVID and the quarantine procedures. And it looks like, that if he came back now, he'd have to deal with that. So if he comes back, I feel like there's a better chance that it happens after all of this is kind of in the past, as opposed to now, where I would say there's probably a very low chance, if not a 0% chance, but we don't really know the answer.
Agreed.
So,
that makes perfect sense. I could see him coming back when, we reach a certain level of herd immunity with the vaccine and everything else. But I'd take him back, give him a month, come back in a month, 2 weeks to get in some kind of shape, and then 2 weeks to get in some kind of game shape. And hey, he's welcome. We'll fit him in.
Yeah, exactly. Sean Fitzpatrick at Sean Fit 911-41350 asks, power play seems to have bogged down again. Any changes that could be implemented to spark it again? So I'm not really, I don't know. It's early in the season. So I want to kind of give him a little bit more of a chance because I think that the power play has looked decent. They got a couple early goals that I don't know if you call are lucky, but the ones that Gustafsson shot from the point that were deflected by JVR on the one and then Patrick on the other with kind of like his butt. But, I want to give these power play combinations a little bit of a chance. I still think that I'd like to see Travis Sanheim on the power play. But aside from that, I would keep it as is and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I got to give it a little more time. They're working more north-south plays that hopefully will result in enough variety. So if they mix in a little east-west, it just gives them more options. And the one area where Gustafsson should help, at least on PP2, is getting pucks through. I mean, it's more important than anything. They seem to be going a lot to this double screen again, which served them well in the past. And having Patrick out there, and I think Patrick eventually, especially if Couturier is going for a while. Did they move Patrick to the first power play? I didn't notice that. I gotta confess.
They kept the forward units together on the power play, I think, but I don't recall exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, if he continues to shine, he might deserve some time there because of the fact that he can do everything you need on a power play to really shine. And I love the fact that TK is now down low in like a Brendan Gallagher position, and that's a good thing. Chef?
Yeah, I wanted to go back a second because when we were talking about the whole Niski thing, I had my mic off. And I wanted to bring up something. Technically, would we have the room to even sign him back? Because it would still be at his previous rate, correct? Because
no, he's retired. I mean, if he wanted to come back, I don't think they could reinstate the contract. I think he'd have to sign a new deal.
Well,
maybe Dan, you want to weigh in on that one?
Well, the reason why I'm asking real fast is because Cap Friendly has him suspended without pay, and he's in there. And so I don't know. And it says, so I'm just curious, is it just an activation because he still would have been under contract if he comes back in the same season? Is that how it works?
That's a really good question. If he's listed, and it's just a procedural thing. It's not, damn you, Matt. It's nothing like that. It's how they handle the contract that optimizes what they want to do cap-wise. But, suspended without pay. Not sure.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how that works. I'm guessing that he might, after this season when his contract would have been up, I'm guessing that he'll just come off the books. And again, I don't expect him to come back this year.
But doesn't that say a lot that we're already asking for him to come back? Chuck, what were you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much we could have done about it.
No.
He seems like a family man who didn't really like the bubble environment and wasn't worth it. I'm sure he saved up a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
Just
leave him alone. He's a family man.
Exactly. Leave him alone. Let's see. Let's go back to some of the questions here. There's got a couple left. So this is an interesting question. And I still don't know what my answer would be. Brett Longo at Brett_Longo_3 asks, which prospect will have the biggest impact in the next 2 to 3 years? So I guess, again, it depends on your definition of prospect. Like coming into the year, Morgan Frost is a prospect. He was number one on my list of Flyers prospects coming into the year. And I still think that over the next 2 to 3 years, he will impact this team the most of any of their prospects. But there's obviously, some other guys. The dark horse, I would say, would be a Tanner Lazinski. I still think that when he gets going, he could be a pretty good third-line NHL player. I think that the answer that you've got to hope it's going to be is Flyers fans have got to hope that next year either Egor Zamula or Cam York really has an impact on this team because, you need to improve the defense more than you do the forward core. So you got to hope that's true. But Zamula didn't look NHL ready in camp this year, and Cam York is still in college. So I'm guessing York is going to turn pro next year. Will he be ready for the NHL? I'm not sure. He might. If he is NHL ready, I'm not sure he's going to have a huge impact. I think, you got to hope that Zamula maybe takes a big step up in the AHL this year and comes in next year and makes a big impact. So I think the answer is still Frost, but I think if you're a Flyers fan, you probably want it to be Zamula or York. What do you guys think?
Oh, I agree with you. I agree. I think it's going to be York. I think it really is, because it says 2 to 3 years. So we're assuming the timeline that you just said, that puts him right at, right smack dab in the middle of that timeline for Brett. So I'm saying, judging by, leadership qualities and all that stuff and what I saw right now for juniors, I think he was very consistent. He was calming. He had a calming influence on his team. And I think that's what could possibly be the best thing for this team on the defensive end going into the future, is somebody that's steady and calm. And I think that's what Niskanen was. And I think that's what the team needs. So I would have to say Cam York.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be like the physical presence of Niskanen. When I see York, I think of a player like Marc-Edouard Vlasic in San Jose, who, York might not be as much of an offensive force as maybe people think, but we'll find out. He's going to get stronger, and his shot should get better and all that. But I think the way he plays efficiently without a lot of slack in his game, it will be something more subtle. And like Chef was saying, and I'm sure, Dan, you would agree, he's very efficient, and he just calmly, efficiently makes plays that keep these fires from starting in his own zone. And that's a lot to ask. That would be pretty good.
Yeah, the best word to describe York is efficient. I mean, he's just a very efficient player. The puck is on his stick and off his stick very quickly. He makes the right plays. He shows, I think that if you were looking for a guy to become like a superstar defenseman, he's going to have to get a lot more aggressive in the offensive zone. Right now, to me, he looks like he'll become a pretty good second pair NHL defenseman who moves the puck really well, both at even strength and on the power play, and he's pretty good in his own zone. So, I think he's a pretty good defenseman. And maybe in 3 years he'll be the best of that group, but I'm not sure that next year he's going to make a huge impact. But either way.
Now, one last thing, and it's going to stand out in bold relief when you pass on Cole Caulfield. So be watching to see how that turns out. I know a lot of Flyers fans will.
Yeah.
So a couple more questions. One is from Steel Flyers. That Steel Flyers 52 is a big fan of our show. And he says, Smooth D Silver 88, I got one for you. With Coots down and Frost Myers potentially out for some time, what moves do the Flyers need to make? So, we talked about this one internally. I think that you're going to see Connor Bonneman and Mark Friedman take those spots, at least until Shane Gostisbehere is ready to come back. But the big question mark is externally, what's the move that they make? And, we discussed it, and I'm not 100% sure what is out there, but that's going to be up to Chuck Fletcher to figure out. But I think internally it's going to be Bunneman and Friedman. That's pretty evident. The next question is from Josh at Joshin_Wit_Josh asks, what moves could the Flyers make to shore up their defense? And what's your realistic dream scenario for that potential trade? Also, what is more value, in your opinion, a pick or a prospect? I think that it depends on who the prospect is. But in general, I think prospects have more value just because it's a tangible asset. Although sometimes, first-round pick, people dream about turning that into a star player. So that's a tough one. And again, going back to the moves on the defense, I mean, that's the $1 million question. And I don't know what the move is that you make at the beginning of the season when every team thinks that they might be a playoff contender to do something. I mean, again, maybe Matt Dumba comes back into play. If the Wild are struggling, I don't know. Do you guys have any guys out there who you think that they could bring in?
I mean, all you can do is check on cap friendly and see what teams have cap space.
Yeah. I mean, that's
the first thing
basically
that comes to mind. And there's not a lot of teams that are in that category. And if there are, some of them are like, the Rangers are doing okay with the cap and all that, but they're in contention. They have hopes that they're going to do something. The Bruins, they lost a couple players, so they're not going to come out. I mean, if you want to go Keith Yandel with the Flyers, can't take on that.
No.
I mean, if they thought Yandel was a lot better than Ghost, I guess they could do that. But Yandel's 34.
He's not the kind of guy that you want to.
No, he's not. He can munch a lot of minutes, and he's better than Ghost. But even at 34, with making 6.35 for the next, this season and 2 more after that, I just don't see it. I really don't have an answer right now. I look at who's out there, and it's the Flyers pro scouts are gonna earn their money. I can tell you that.
Yep.
Well, it's a shame that when you're looking down and Tanner had such a rough start. I mean, I thought that he was somebody that could have been that center that steps in the lineup later down the road. I mean, with the big question mark before the season started with Nolan Patrick. So it's a shame that he got such a bumpy start, because I thought he could have maybe stepped in and made a difference here. But, like you said, as it goes on, when we had Jason Martinez on, he was saying that, you got $2 million in cap space now or whatever. It doubles by the time you get a better quality player as you go towards the end of the season. And, it basically speaks volumes of what you can do later on. I just think it's too early right now, and there's not much you're going to be able to do except ride it out and hope. We talked about all those years where Hextall drafted and all the moves that was made to get all these prospects. Now, like Dan said at the beginning of the season, it's time for the prospects to take that next step. And, you got 12 of them. If you hit on 2 or 3 of them, it's a great thing. So, but I think internally that's the way they have to go right now, because they don't have the money to do anything else.
No, even if you thought somebody like Anton Strawman had a little bit left at age 34, he's making 5.5. And is Florida ready to usher him out the door? No, they're trying to get rid of Yandel. So, there's going to have to be somebody like that, but I agree with Chef. It's going to have to be later in the season.
Mm-hmm.
So the last question from Chris Peters at ECP_863. There's no question as to his skill. However, do you see Hayes' lack of speed becoming an issue as he gets deeper into his contract and the game gets faster and faster? I don't. I mean, I don't think that Hayes' lack of speed doesn't really impact him now. Like, I think that as he gets deeper and deeper into his contract, his playing style may actually age better than some other players, because it's not dependent on speed or foot, or, it's not dependent on his speed. So as long as he's still got that big butt and he can shield the puck from people and has that hockey IQ, like I see Hayes as a guy who's going to age pretty well. You saw it with a guy like Jaromir Jagr, not comparing the two, obviously, but Jagr was able to play so long because he was such a good puck possession player. He's never a guy who had blinding speed, but he could protect the puck from people. And that won't change as Hayes gets older. As long as he stays, in shape and kind of keeps his lower body strength, I think that Hayes will actually age fairly well.
Yeah, and I think of a player like Michael Handzus, who couldn't really skate that well at all, but he aged very well. Joel Otto hung around for a long time. Their games evolved. They became more defensive players. Early in his career, Michael Handzus scored a lot for St. Louis. By the time he got here, he was a third-line defensive center. And will he be overpaid? Sure. But if Kevin Hayes is a nice fit as a 3C in the twilight years of his time here, that means the Flyers are doing okay at 1 and 2C.
Yep. And so those are all the questions we had. Those are some good ones. Thanks to our listeners for sending them in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. It's something we'd like to make a regular feature, at least semi-regular. Yeah, we're really happy to do it at any time. And gents, with that, we are going to wrap up this edition of the O&B Puckcast. But before we go, let's do some outros with starting with you, Dan, where people can, converse with you on Twitter and all the rest of that stuff.
Yeah, so folks can find me on Twitter at dsilver88 and throw me a follow and argue with me or yell at me or do whatever you want. I've got thicker skin than Jake Voracek, so that's where you can find me.
Yeah. I think a newborn has thicker skin, but Chef.
You can catch me at Chef to the Left B on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram too. Brendan Gillespie, you can catch me there. I think it's Brendan. Yeah, it's just you can look at my old food stuff, and I do Flyers references once in a while on there too as well. So
you do know your first name? You sure about that?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. I'm Isaiah, ISAIAH_520. Isaiah, don't forget the _520. And of course, you can follow the O&B Puckcast on Twitter at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. We have a YouTube channel. Just look us up in the search part. And of course, subscribe, hit that notification bell every time we have a new show on YouTube. It will notify you. And of course, if you're on Apple or one of the other formats, if you could give us a review, a 5-star rating, wherever you're allowed to do that, it moves us up the charts for people who are looking for a Philadelphia Flyers podcast. We appreciate your listenership and your help in that regard. So until February 1st, the Flyers are going to play 6 games that I mentioned before, including the tail end of that back-to-back versus the Islanders. We're going to come back at you. We might have a special in between now and then because it's about 10 days away. But look for that. At the very least, we'll see you again on February 1st. And with that, everybody, take care.